It's time for part 3. Part 3 of what? My look at the history of and around the U8 U-Bahn line in Berlin. But who the hell are you? My name is Johnny Whitlam. I've been a tour guide in Berlin since 2010. I absolutely love being a tour guide. If you're watching this, hey, you probably know that, and if you don't, you do now. You can find out more about my tours on my website, or you can follow me on Instagram and TikTok. But what I want to do right now is get into the history. In part 1, we looked at the construction of the line. In part 2, we started our tour down the line, starting in Wittenau and finishing up that part of the tour at Bernauer where the U8 crossed the Berlin Wall. And it did cross it. It went right underneath, and it continued to operate even though the city was divided. It, however, only took West Berlin passengers from West Berlin under East Berlin, and then back to West Berlin. We talked about a couple of escape stories there. They're pretty cool if you want to go and check out that video. However, today we're going to continue our journey one stop further south to Rosenthaler Platz. Now, the first thing that you'll notice about Rosenthaler Platz is probably the bright orange tiles, which are famous for all the wrong reasons. They're made with what's called a uranium glaze. It gives you these nice bright colors, in this case bright orange, fantastic. However, it also gives you uranium, which is radioactive. So apparently, Rosenthaler Platz is the most radioactive station on the Berlin U-Bahn network. I am told, though, that it is a safe level of uranium. So long as you're not hugging them 24 hours a day, you should be fine. So I guess cancel your plans for licking the Rosenthaler Platz tiles. Now, the more interesting history for me here is the old history of Berlin. Rosenthaler Platz Station, well, the Platz upstairs used to be called Tor, or gate. So this is where the Rosenthal Gate used to be, which was the gate used by Berlin's Jewish community, which was invited to Berlin in the 1670s, basically to build up the population following the 30 Years' War and a couple of bouts of plague. This means that the Rosenthal Gate was the only gate through which Jews could enter the city, and one Jew did just that on the 25th of October, 1743. His name was Moses Mendelssohn, and he was only 14 years old. He was born in Dessau, which is nowhere near Berlin. In fact, it's 80 miles or 130 kilometers away, and he walked here. When he walked here, he would have, of course, arrived in the southwest of the city, but like all Jews, he had to go through the one gate, so he would have had to have walked around the outside of the city to the Rosenthal Gate and then come in through there. And we know that he arrived on that day specifically because the records show that 6 oxen, 7 pigs, and a Jew arrived. Now, if you think you've heard the name Mendelssohn before, you may be familiar with the famous composers in his family, but Moses Mendelssohn himself is famous for being really the key figure, or one of the key figures, behind the Jewish Enlightenment. Now, that's a massive topic that we're not going to go into in a huge amount of detail here. Suffice to say that the Jewish Enlightenment sees a lot of Jews change their religious practices, change the language that they speak, and change a lot about themselves, with the goal of fitting in or assimilating into wider, predominantly, of course, German society. This, of course, you can imagine would split opinion, but what it did allow for is Berlin's Jewish community to become very settled and very successful, especially throughout the 19th century when we see the Industrial Revolution. A lot of Jews would find themselves in positions that would allow them to make a lot more money than they ever could before. They would work in law and newspaper editing. There's even a Jewish man, Bleichschroeder is his family name, who became one of the top advisors to Otto von Bismarck, the Iron Chancellor who unified Germany. It's because of the Jewish Enlightenment that Jews were really able to cement their place in Jewish society, so much so that they were able to fight as regular German soldiers in the First World War, which they would of course then be blamed for by nationalists and conservatives for losing, which would be one of the many ways that the Nazis were able to really conjure hate among the German population for Jews, a kind of hate that had always existed in some way on a low level, but they would take that to a level that had never been seen before. Unsurprisingly, the majority of the Jewish community of Berlin was either killed or had to flee during the Nazi regime. As for us right now, we are going to leave the Rosenthaler Platz and the Rosenthaler Thor behind and continue 2 stops down the line to Alexanderplatz. I think it's fair to say that Alexanderplatz is the most famous, the most iconic station in Berlin, and it's completely confusing. Here's how I think about it. You've got the U2 on one side, the U8 on the other, and then the U5 connecting them. And once you kind of work that out, it all makes sense. And of course, if you need to take a larger train, S-Bahn, intercity train, airport train, whatever, that's all upstairs, and that's its own kind of kettle of fish. We're focusing on the U-Bahn today. Now, the U2 section, that was opened here in 1913. It is quite plain, but it has a certain different style to it than the U5 and the U8 sections, which were, quite exciting for the day. Think Bauhaus, think the modern architecture of the 1920s. That's really what the architect was going for here, and his name was Alfred Grenander. In fact, before World War I, Grenander designed stations that were a lot more decorative, a lot more opulent in a way, like the neoclassical facade of the Wittenbergplatz station here and its Wilhelmine interior, which opened in 1902, making it one of the very first U-Bahn stations on Berlin's network. The plan for Alexanderplatz then was for a modern station. That's where these iconic, brightly colored tiles come in. The idea is that U-Bahn riders could recognize them without having to see the station sign, so they'd know exactly where they were. Very efficient for a very big and busy city. It also has the added benefit of making it easier for people who can't read to use the stations as well, to use the system as well. And then, okay, I think a lot of people don't really look at Alexanderplatz and other similar stations as kind of architectural design wonders, but the closer you look, the more little details you find, like when you look at the lights and the columns and I believe one of the old signs over here, you get a kind of sense of the kind of old world. This station is coming up to 100 years old. Grenander referred to this station as the Theater des Verkehrs, the theatre of traffic. The idea being that Alexanderplatz station, big, sprawling and bustling as it is just a stage, and it's the Berliners who are the actors. The U-Bahn brings together absolutely everybody, all sorts of different walks of life, and here they bustle past one another. Here, in this station, you can get an idea for what Berlin is, or back when this opened, 1930, what Berlin was. And large and busy as it is, it was supposed to be that much busier. Down here in the great big U5 section, there are actually 4 platforms, one next to me over here, and then you can see another 3 here. And that's because it wasn't just supposed to be the U5 that was coming here, but the kind of mythologized, fabled U10 that for whatever reasons over the years has never come to fruition. But that was supposed to go northeast from Alexanderplatz in the direction of a district called Weißensee. However, when you get to the end of the platform over here, you can see there's something of a problem. There is nowhere to go. And speaking of nowhere to go, it's time to take a look at where the U8 didn't go. Let's talk about the Weissentunnel. So the original plan was to have the tunnel run on the other side of Alexanderplatz station, just a little bit further south, beneath this street right here, beneath Weissenstraße. We talked about this in part 1. This is the part that basically, because of inferior materials, lack of manpower during the First World War, it wasn't built so well and it ran into problems, particularly in the section beneath the river, which is a place where, I guess you really don't want problems, cracks in the tunnel. And so it was usable, but not totally. In fact, only half of it was usable. And not half like top and bottom, like half side to side. Basically, the original plan was to have trains run next to each other, right? 2 tracks. And only one of the sides was usable. And so it's turned into one of those things that U-Bahn riders don't really know about, but drivers certainly do, because the tunnel could be used to move trains between the U5 and U8 lines that otherwise when they meet at a right angle. So very, very useful, and it's kind of still used that way today. It's under construction at the moment. You can actually see that there's a grate down here. There's warm, stinky air coming up from here. So yeah, this is where the Weissentunnel is. Connecting between the U8 and U5 lines back in the days of the Berlin Wall, that's a problem if you're the East German states, because the U8 is that ghost line, right? That's running from West Berlin in the north through East Berlin, where we are here, and then south back to West Berlin, back to Kreuzberg and Neukölln. And so if anyone were to, say, break into the Weissentunnel, they could escape to West Berlin. And that's exactly what one guy did. He was a East Berlin U-Bahn worker. The East Berlin Transport Authority was called the BVB. His name was Dieter Wendt, and he actually went into a station on the U2 line, Klosterstraße. There's a little service tunnel in there that allowed him to access the Weissentunnel. So he, his wife, his cousin, and his cousin's 2-year-old ended up walking through the Weissentunnel here and then kind of coming back on themselves, exactly where you see this bridge here, where they could enter Jannowitzbrücke station.
And once in there, without being seen by the guards, they were able to flag down a passing U-Bahn train, and the driver let them in, actually into the cabin, where they all huddled on the floor until they got to West Berlin. And so this guy essentially escaped to the west by catching the U-Bahn. It's pretty cool, no?
Man, I would love to take a look inside the Weissentunnel. I did try. I asked the BVG about a year ago if I could get in there and make one of my Instagram reels, and they didn't say no, they just didn't say anything. So if you work for the BVG and you think you can make that happen, we could tell this story to so many more people. It would be a lot of fun. As for us right now, it's time to keep going on our U8 journey, not where the U8 didn't go in the Weissentunnel, but where the U8 did go over to Jannowitzbrücke. If you look at the U-Bahn station at Jannowitzbrücke today, I mean, it's fine. It's one of the more plain stations. I mean, bright yellow, fun. But the interesting part of this station for me is the history behind it. And actually, we're talking about the original people who built it. So we're talking late 1920s and a team of something like 40 carpenters who have come down to build this station from Hamburg. And that's key. They're from Hamburg. They don't know how Berlin works at this time because this is the post-World War I period and everything has changed. Berlin has become this kind of adult hedonistic paradise where people are taking a lot of illicit substances and maybe paying one another for a nice time between the sheets as well. And the people that are keeping all of this illicit hedonistic business running, they're the Ringvereine, the organized crime clubs. I mean, the name translates as wrestling clubs, but we're talking something that's more like the mafia than the WWE. Imagine a 1920s German WWE. Anyway, let's get back on topic. So what happens to these 40 carpenters? Well, after their day at work building the Jannowitzbrücke station, working on the tunnel around here, they would go to a bar called the Naubar. It was a little bit down the road, near to today's Ostbahnhof station. If you want to go there today, though, there's not much to look at, just a hotel that looks like it was built around the year 2000. Anyway, these 40 carpenters would go to this bar, and hey, we've all been to bars before. Sometimes people have a couple of beers and things go wrong. Well, one of these carpenters was only 18 years old. I guess he'd had a couple of drinks. He bumped into a guy. A fight escalated. The carpenter pulled a knife. He actually stabbed this guy. The wound turned out to be fatal. His name was Malchin. It got a lot worse from here.
The next night, the carpenters go back to the bar, and so do some of the gang members. And they jump the 18-year-old lad as he stood outside the bar. Well, the other carpenters come out to help him, and they fight the gang off. They think that's that, until they find out that the gang have just run off to tell other gangs, hey, we need some help. Loads of Berlin's gang members from all sorts of different places come and descend on this bar, the Naubar, and it turns into a massive brawl. Carpenters and gang members start hitting each other with pool cues, table legs, and chairs. According to one source, one guy runs outside and finds a frozen fish, starts hitting people with that. Not sure how effective it is, but good for you, buddy. It's more serious than that, though. A couple of people pull guns, 2 people are shot. One of the carpenters is killed, and so is a Berlin bricklayer that had joined them, started to help them. The whole thing became known as the Battle of Schlesischer Bahnhof.
So this story really shows you how wild and dangerous and exciting Weimar-era Berlin was, but it's more serious than you might think. It was exactly stories like this that allowed the Nazi Party to convince people to vote for them. How? By saying, look at how terrible society has become since the betrayal of the First World War when the Jews stabbed us in the back. Look at what we're doing with criminals. We're letting them run society when instead the rule of law should take precedence. Only the Nazis, only Adolf Hitler, they would say, could fix this. They would also take small parts of these events and blow them out of proportion. For example, one of the organized crime leaders at this time was a man named Muskel Adolf. I'm sure he wasn't a great contributor to society. Now, he was brought into court as a result of the Battle of Schlesischer Bahnhof, and he was given a slap on the wrists. He basically got away with it. Of course, that's the kind of thing that's going to frustrate people and make them roll their eyes. But the Nazis, they were able to say, you know, criminals are allowed to get away with anything in this society, and so-called professional criminals like Muskel Adolf would then be arrested and sent to concentration camps under the Nazis. As far as I know, though, Muskel Adolf survived and lived into the 1960s in East Berlin. Anyways, we've only got one more station to go in part 3, so let's hop on the U-Bahn and travel to Heinrich-Heine-Straße. So, Heinrich-Heine-Straße, our last stop on part 3 of our look at the U8 and our last stop inside of East Berlin. So this station is famous for a couple of things. For me, it's one of the stations that's regularly filled with some of the more sad characters really that populate the U8, right? There's a lot of addicts, homeless people who use the stations on this line as a refuge. I didn't want to talk about them so much in this video because, yeah, they're going through something tough and we're looking at the history, and I think it's just better to give them their dignity. This station, though, is famous for being home to the Kit Kat Club, and I'll be honest, I've never been there. I'm too British. I'm a bit too uptight to have ever visited the Kit Kat and taken off all of my clothes. But I think a lot of people watching this, that's what they'll associate with this area. For me, though, because I know it's this last stop between East Berlin and then heading south Mauruszat in West Berlin, I always think of what has to be just the dumbest Berlin Wall escape. So there's 3 guards that are based in this station while it's a ghost line, and we're talking early days of the Berlin Wall. This is 22nd of June, 1963. Wall hasn't even been up 2 years yet. Now, apparently these 3 guys are listening to a Western radio station inside of their little, I guess, compartment inside of the platform there. Don't know whether or not that's true, but it kind of adds a certain flavor to the story. Now, there are a few workers in the station on this night. They're fixing up parts of the track or whatever they're doing, fixing up the doors that come down to stop the trains going through, something like this. And essentially, one of these guards goes to inspect the work and he doesn't come back. So he's gone. And this is actually one of the problems with the Berlin Wall, right? The people who are rather forced to man it are young men. And young men, as a former young man, I can say, young men are pretty dumb. And so they don't really think about danger or other people so much. And so, you know what? Maybe he was listening to his Western rock music and he thinks, damn, life over there is cool. So he just goes. That means that there's still 2 loyal guards in East Berlin, and one of them sends the other to go look for this guy. And yeah, he goes to look for him, all right. And he doesn't come back. And so the way I imagine this, and this is only just me kind of knowing the story and adding little parts onto it, but there's the one guy left who's like, well, I'm going to get in a lot of trouble if people find out that the other 2 are gone, so bye. And then the 3rd one leaves as well, and there you go. There's no guards left inside of the station. Very embarrassing for the East German authorities there. Anyways, that is the end of part 3. I hope you've enjoyed it. We're going to take a look at Mauruszat next time, and then follow the line all the way down to its southernmost point, which is Hermannstraße. If you have enjoyed this, why not tell someone about it? Hey, that guy who does the history stuff on Instagram, he's got a YouTube channel now. Or you could leave a comment below saying, hey, Johnny, I've been following parts 1 and 2. Part 3 was really fun. Can't wait for part 4. I've received a few really encouraging comments, which has been very nice because I'm not so confident in the long format videos yet, but hey, it's all a learning experience. And if you're thinking, is he talking funny? Allergies season! All right, goodbye.